Greetings. I'm fresh off a plane from Los Angeles, and I thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here, and I want to thank John Burns and Tom Newton in particular for your leadership. I could go on and have a long conversation with you, probably you speaking more than me, about the challenges that you all face as the world changes, but I do appreciate and thank and admire the work that you each do every day. I start my morning, every morning, reading what you write and the thoughts that you have and the opinions that you offer us. And I thank you for the leadership that you provide the state and the country as an eye and an ear to and for California. So there are many things I could talk about, and I've been given 10 minutes. So I'm going to, I'll start my very brief comments by saying I love my job. I really do. I, too, am a child, a daughter of California, and I will tell you, when I attended my first meeting of the National Association of Attorneys General, which they call NAG, apparently no one really thought that one through, I was acutely aware when I walked in that room of representing our great state. I was acutely aware of the fact that still that old adage remains true: so goes California, goes the rest of the country. It was clear to me that the rest of the country still looks to us as a state for what change looks like. They look to us as the place that creates and highlights what happens when we embrace innovation. And so doing the work that we do is work that I think makes us all proud to be Californians, but it is work that also has an impact on the largest state in the country, but because of that reason and many others, has an impact on the entire country, if not the world. And so the work that we have done has varied, and I'm sure we're going to get into a conversation about a lot of it. 4 things in particular I'd like to highlight, though. And thinking of these subject areas among the many that we work on and address as areas that I think are examples of what we can and what we need to do to be a little bit smarter in the way we run government. And I say that absolutely believing as a lifelong public servant, that government has value and virtue. But I also believe, doing the work from the inside, that there is much about what we do that is a bit obsolete and can be improved. And apparently someone agrees with me. And so I think of it then from a perspective, what do you mean, Kamala, when you say we can be smarter, and how should we be smarter? I think part of the approach and the method has to be to really think about our work in the way the private sector does and ask, what is the return on our investment? I think that we need to infuse more metrics into our analysis of effectiveness and not gauge or measure our success based on some blind adherence to tradition. I think we need to employ more tools that are data-based, data-driven, to help us then measure and monitor our success. And so 4 areas in particular that we've been working on, but other areas in the past, recently, perhaps the national mortgage settlement, and many of you wrote about it. I'll give you that as an example of the past. When we were engaged in that conversation with the 5 big banks of the United States, one of the first things that I told my team is, and maybe it's because I'm a bit anal, but that we're going to hire a bunch of economists to go up and down the state and tell us exactly what is going on in each of the 58 counties of California in terms of the number of underwater mortgages and underwater by how much. Because the first phase of the conversation that was happening with them was a conversation that dropped on the table a very large number for California, $2 to $4 billion. What a grand gesture. But measured against what, I said. And that's when we did the work of employing a method that is about data-driven, to look at where we actually are in terms of the numbers and then measure the offer against that. So that's an example of what we did in our most recent past. But I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing more recently and as we go forward. One is on the issue of education. So we have that debate, all of us, often. What is the state of public education in California? As a career prosecutor, and I've personally prosecuted everything from low-level offenses to homicides, I will tell you with a strong conviction that I believe there's a direct relationship between public safety and public education. And so I come to it from that perspective, as well as from the perspective of someone whose first grade teacher, Mrs. Frances Wilson, God rest her soul, attended my law school graduation. Public education, we debate it. There's a lawsuit going on in Los Angeles right now. We all know about it. We can debate all day long, rightly, what is the quality of the education that we are offering our students in our public schools. We can talk about it in reference to the fact that we rightly and uniquely have explicit in the Constitution of our state that education is a right. But I would suggest all of that must happen, but we can't even get to that discussion if our children are not in school, because then they're receiving no education, which is why we decided to do a report last year after a couple of years of research on the state of elementary school truancy in California. I came at the issue also because years before, when I was district attorney of San Francisco, I was curious about who our homicide victims were who were under the age of 25, quickly learned that 94% of them were high school dropouts, and when you looked at who were chronically and habitually truant high school or public school students, 40% were elementary school students. So we published the report yet last year, and this is what we found. 1 million children in California, elementary school children, last school year, were truant. We found that there were 250,000 elementary school students, K through 6, who had missed more than 10% of the school year. We found that California school districts are leaving a little bit more than $1 billion on the table every year from unreimbursed expenses. And when you look at the associated cost, because that kid is likely to be a high school dropout, when you look then at the cost of a high school dropout to California, the reasonable estimates are on an annual basis, we're spending over $40 billion a year, and everything that is associated with who that high school dropout will be in terms of burdening our public safety, public health, social services systems, and what they will deprive us of in terms of lost productivity, and what could be otherwise a meaningful participant in our workforce. So we took a look at that, and lo and behold, not surprising, because we started out with a hypothesis, part of what we found, California is one of 4 states in the United States of America that does not track elementary school truancy. And I think, when I started, well, then I said to my team, well, who are the other 3? Well, there are other big states also. So one inference, I think logical, is that maybe we're not doing it because we're such a big state and we have so many kids. But see, this is the difference, and this is where I'm going to get to technology. I know the clock is running on me.
Don't worry about it.
But where about being smart also means about adoption of technology, and I'm almost obsessed with this issue. Adoption of technology by law enforcement in particular and government in general. I think that one of the reasons we probably haven't been tracking is just difficult. And especially when we were in an age and an era of the person who would track it would be, under a green visor with a number 2 pencil and a yellow pad. But now technology allows us to do that, collect information, and then analyze it with incredible accuracy, speed, and efficiency and effectiveness. We have to have leadership in California, I believe, on the issue of adoption of technology across the board, on this issue of elementary school truancy. Part of our recommendations for the counties and the school districts is that there will be a push, a will, and resources put into collecting the data so we can figure out what's going on. We issued a report. I'll send it to any of you who are interested. It's called In School and On Track. And I will also mention, just as a note, public safety, public education. 10% increase in graduation rates in California would decrease crime by 20%. So we estimate that that would equal about 500 homicides a year. Looking at the issue of public safety from another perspective, recidivism. So you all have been writing, and we have been talking about this issue from a number of angles and for many years, including the fact that for many, many years we had the highest recidivism, or one of the highest recidivism rates in the country. Up to 70% of California prisoners, upon release within 3 years, reoffended. Right now we estimate that that's about 62%. Part of the reason we've been talking about it is because a 3-judge panel looked at it from a constitutional perspective after CDCR, California Department of Corrections Rehabilitation, was sued for 3 reasons which deal with mental health, physical health, and dental health. But the end result, which came to us as a crisis, was that the court said you got to release a bunch of prisoners, thousands of them, and then there was also panic in the streets, rightly and understandably. Well, I would suggest that the issue in terms of the recidivism numbers and the outrage that we should feel about that, the concern that we rightly have about releasing prisoners before they have served their sentence, is all about reacting to a symptom. The problem being that we have a revolving door in California, and we've not done much to deal with it. We've not done much to deal with the fact that as it relates to low-level offenders, public policy should recognize they're all coming out, and we don't have a meaningful plan to deal with them. And this is not a conversation about whether there should be consequence or accountability. I am a career prosecutor. There should be consequence and accountability. But let's not be myopic or short-sighted. The vast majority of them are coming out, and we don't have a plan for dealing with them. That's why last year we created a new division in the California Department of Justice, which we have named the Division on Recidivism Reduction and Reentry. And we created in this division 3 subdivisions. One is focused on the programmatic piece, which is what can we do in this era of realignment to support the 58 counties as they've been mandated to come up with a plan for re-entering former offenders in a way we reduce the likelihood that they will re-offend. Because remember, realignment has now shifted the responsibility from the state to the counties to deal with low-level offenders. Second subdivision is about grant funding, because frankly, when you're asking government to engage in innovation, it helps to create incentives. And it is amazing how much people will find creativity when you attach a little grant funding to it. So we have figured that out, and we've been working with foundations, and also we've been in discussions with Eric Holder, frankly, at the United States Department of Justice to figure out ways to bring resources into California to support the counties to be innovative and create reentry initiatives. And then the third piece is the data piece. And so recently, for example, we sent out, after working on this for quite some time, a survey to the 58 counties, because do you know we don't have one accepted and common definition of recidivism in the state. So we pretty much have almost 58 definitions. So we sent out a survey. We're in the process of analyzing and assessing the feedback, and we got up to a little bit over 40% response. I'm told by my statistician friends and those folks who generally do surveys that generally consider it a success if you get 15% response. So that tells us there is a need and a bit of a clamoring for this kind of work and approach, which is let's start out with the common definition. I'm sure nobody will really love it, but at least we'll start out with one. And then let's start measuring and collect the data. So this is the work that we're doing with the new division of the State Department of Justice. Again, meeting some of the public safety challenges that California faces. And then finally, I'll just talk a little bit about 2 other things, and then I'll sit right down. One is transnational gangs. The first trip that I took officially after taking office in 2011 was to go down to Calexico, which is a town in Imperial County, one of our most southern counties in California, and it's on the border with Mexico. And I went down there because, being the trial lawyer that I like to go to the scene, I wanted to see the tunnels. And I went down and I saw some tunnels that had yet to be destroyed, and you probably all read about the one that was just discovered most recently that is the size of 1.5 football fields, thankfully not in our state. But I went to see the tunnels, saw some that were still intact, others I saw photographs. I saw tunnels with walls as smooth as the walls in this ballroom, lined with lighting and air conditioning, which made a very obvious point clear. Those tunnels about some folks making a whole lot of money in the trafficking of guns and drugs and human beings. The big burly guards down at the gate told me with tears in their eyes about children as young as 5 years old being trafficked through those tunnels. So we've decided to address this issue from a number of perspectives. One, which is to deal strictly with the transnational crime aspect of it and the cartels. And to that end, I convened a bunch of southern state attorneys general at one of the NAG meetings, and they have agreed to work with us. So those states that are at least initially plagued by this issue, and by the way, I say initially purposely because the whole country is, we just happen to be the gateway, these states. We talked about what we are going to do to commit ourselves to combine resources, all of us being relatively strapped, and to combine intelligence to work on this issue. And so they have agreed, and we, California, are leading a contingent of attorneys general, state attorneys general to Mexico in the spring to meet with the Mexican AGs, our counterparts, and to talk specifically about the issue of transnational gangs from 3 perspectives. One, the trafficking piece, which is the guns, drugs, and human beings. The other is to deal with the cybersecurity issue. Because believe it or not, they're incredibly sophisticated and present a real threat in terms of our concerns about hacking. And then the other is the intellectual property piece. And I can tell you, our folks who are doing incredible and important work in Los Angeles in our entertainment industry, to our folks in Silicon Valley and technology, are all rightly concerned about what's happening in terms of piracy. And there is some of that happening by these transnational gangs. So we're going to go and address those three issues. But it's going to be about combining resources and intelligence and recognizing that smart government, and when we are smarter, it is about collaboration, and it is about communication and sharing of information to be more efficient with often restricted resources. And then finally, I'm going to talk about technology. When I was elected District Attorney of San Francisco in 2004, a world-class city, the first cousin of Silicon Valley, 2/3 of my lawyers did not have email. The San Francisco Police Department just rolled out email in 2011. When you pull back the curtain on the way government works, sometimes it makes me think of that little guy in The Wizard of Oz. Like, it's amazing anything is getting done. And on this issue of adoption of technology, we've got a real challenge. And so the work that we have been doing in my office is one, about supporting local law enforcement. So the California Department of Justice created a mobile app, which we call Mobile Justice, which basically is, and this was after we toured a bunch of technology companies and just figured out this technology exists. And I said, well, why can't we do this for the cops on the street? So we have, and we started rolling it out. We beta tested it, and now we're rolling out in the state. Simply put, we maintain, the State Department of Justice, almost 20 different databases around criminal history and criminal information, separately maintained. So cop on the street contacting a suspect. Okay, what happens? Because we got to break it down to the mundane detail always, right, instead of the grand gesture. Here's what goes on. He's on his radio. She is on her radio. I just radio in to talk to another human being. I just contacted so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. Can you imagine if it's windy or raining? This is the information. They're exchanging information. God forbid a letter gets misconstrued or a digit gets dropped. That could be all the difference in terms of, first, that officer's safety, but second, community safety in terms of the speed with which we can either get the bad guy or not. So we created a mobile app. And so now, cops on the street, on their smartphone, can get into the mobile app and download the information in real time with accuracy about who they have contacted. This is one example of some other work that we are doing that is about adoption of technology by law enforcement in particular, but with an extension to government in general. And I'm going to close my comments by saying again, thank you. I talked as fast as I could. I'm now going to sit down.